What's the difference between Sufism and Salafism? I will explain in detail. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Most Sunni Muslims today are unaware of the fact that the main two schools of Sunni Islam that are kind of battling are Sufi Islam and Salafi Islam. Most would kind of say, let's not talk about that, we are all Muslims. In an idealistic world, this type of willful ignorance may be desirable, but people who only want to be Muslims and want to be blind to the differences between Sufi and Salafi tend to become very intolerant to different interpretations of, for example, the tasbih or rings. Now, Sufism is a Western term. In Islam, you're referring to tasawwuf or tariqah. Now, the history of tasawwuf or Islamic mysticism dates back to the earlier generations. The four Imams, Malik, Hanif, Hanbali, and Shafi, all mentioned and approved tasawwuf in Islamic law. The Quran has teachings on purification of the soul, or tazkiyatun nafs. According to Sheikh Hisham, early Muslims would walk around claiming that they have purified their soul. I am purified, I am purified. So early Muslims created a science for how to purify the soul. And this is the science of tasawwuf, the science of how to purify your soul so that teachers, imams, sheikhs can determine who is purified and who is just talking nonsense. Now, Salafism is around 150 years old, rooted in the word Salaf, which is rooted in the teachings of Wahhabism or Abdul Wahhab and Ibn Taymiyyah. It is an Islamic purification movement. The Salafis would see the Islam of today's day and age as impure, polluted by wrongful teachings and innovations or bid'ah. So essentially, Islam has fallen astray from the right path of the early Muslims, and the Salafis seek to go back to an earlier form of Islam practiced by the first three generations, the Sahaba, the Tabi'in, and the Tabi'in. Here is where Salafism becomes radical. Not only is it orthodox in the sense that it seeks to go back to an Islam of the early three generations, it claims that only it knows what the Islam of the early three generations is. So the Salafi movement sees itself as the only right interpretation of what the early three generational Islam was. And the Salafis tend to view other paths like Shia and the Sufis as innovators and astray. That is why Salafis have this expansionist missionary attitude of telling other people what is Islam, what is not Islam, what is an innovation, what is kufr, what is shirk, because it thinks that only it is right and all other Muslims, or most of them at least, particularly Sufis, are astray. The consequence of the Salafist movement is that since it constantly attacks essentially Sufi Muslims, the other Sunni, which is Sufi Muslims, it tends to remove or distort or significantly limit the spiritual and the transformational aspect of Islam, which is tasawwuf. And the consequence is the Islam that you have today, almost completely deprived of spirituality, meditation, mysticism, and that inner quality and dimension of Islam, reduced to a Sharia only, for madhabs, exoteric form-based Islam. Therefore, Muslims who are seeking spiritual qualities from Islam like healing, dealing with pain, suffering, rarely can find the answer from those questions within Salafi Islam, so those Muslims would turn to other fields like psychology.